Artists long for a place where they can display their talent, unrestrained by commercialism, uninhibited by management and peer pressure, undaunted by success or failure. A place where anything goes, where everything is accepted. A place where the only demand, though unspoken, is that you do your absolute best. Musicians, actors, authors, poets, and playwrights, singers, dancers, comics, painters, and mimes, they all need this. It sustains life, enlivens spirit, and maintains sanity. There once was such a place.
Hi Bars, it's me Bosca from the Island of Enchantment, although it ain't quite that enchanting since you and Cindy left and the place closed. Yeah, well, do I remember the place? Yeah man, how could you forget? You go up this flight of stairs and you enter this big loft with a high roof, high ceiling, and off on the left was a full wall mural of musicians doing the things musicians do, and facing you was these French doors or French windows opening out onto little balconies on Fortaleza Street. And off to the right was a bandstand, and on the bandstand was this beat-up old Steinway Grand that required daily tuning and still sometimes didn't make it all the way through the night. And there was your Woody bass leaning against the wall, and there was a trap set, I think it was red. And on the other wall, on the back wall, on the left, was a bar, and there you were, holding court in all your funky splendor, usually in earnest conversation with some dude, and I'd walk in, and without even looking up, he'd reach down in the beer cooler and pull out a bottle of Heineken's, ice cold, and slide it down to me, man. And some nights when the cruise ships were in, the place would be really jumping. There'd be all these kids up there, all graduates of like North Texas State and Berkeley, and all these horn players, and it was about the only place a horn player could get a steady job in those days was the cruise ships. Probably still the same way. But these kids would be up there jamming away. I remember one night I was up there comping along, and this trumpet player got up and about 23 years old and blew 26 courses of Stella by Starlight, and maybe the first 4 were takes. He was followed by a sax player doing the same thing. These guys were blowing their little hearts out. And other times I walk in and there'd be just a couple local guys up there jamming away, and I say, hey, come on, bro, let's play a couple of tunes. He say, wait till the drummer gets tired. He always had this thing on. He had this thing on drummers. I remember once he had a T-shirt on the back of it said, so many drummers and so little time. So we get up there and we play a couple obscure tunes that nobody, you and I know. We know them all, man. We had a ball, and some nights the music was great. All nights it was good, and every once in a while the magic would happen. Now you'd be up there, and all the guys would be listening to what everybody else was playing, and be grooving together, you know. And all of a sudden, the musicians became the music, you know. Like the dancer becomes a dance, and it wasn't all just about notes and time anymore. This is like God was sitting in and playing the band, you know. It was a religious experience, honest, man. And that's what it's all about. I mean, you're a musician, you play all these gigs, and some of them are satisfying and some of them not. But every once in a while, the magic happens, and it's happened a lot less frequently since the place closed and you and Cindy left. Yeah, okay. Well, that's about all I got to say, man, except that we miss you and really love you, man. Bye-bye.
The story of the place actually begins next door at 152 Calle Fortaleza in Old San Juan. I had been working on a recording in New York City with a singer named Madeline Brown. Halfway through the project, she unexpectedly took off for Puerto Rico to become manager of the Butterfly People. A few months later, she called me to say that the Palm Court Cafe needed a chef, Would I be interested? Recently separated from my wife Maxine and burned out for many years in the music business, I decided I could do with a change. So I packed up my pots and pans and knives and joined her.
Before Bob and Madeline left for Puerto Rico, we were working on a ballet with the Theater Dance Collection, a company of which I was a founding member. Everything was improvised, dance and music. We gave the girls names, colors, costumes, and characters. The Johns we left to fend for themselves. This video was shot at a dance studio while we were getting ready for their debut at the Brooklyn Academy of Music.
Cynthia and I had been sharing a loft in the garment district before I left. Sensing that she could also use a change, I asked her if she'd like to join me. She agreed, and a few weeks later arrived in San Juan, accompanied by her partner Don Lopez. So far I had been serving only lunch at the Palm Court Cafe, though I was building another kitchen so we could also add dinner. Now that the four of us were together, we approached the owner with the idea of having a dinner theater. Drucker was delighted and said we should put together a commercial to promote it on Mary Hartman, a late-night TV show he was sponsoring. Lacking a video cam, I decided we could make it a slideshow, as we had done for Tango Palace.
Quise en mi patio una mata de hierba buena sembrar, pero aunque llegué a plantar una rama verde y plena, después vi para mi pena marchitarse su hermosura, porque en tierra seca y dura yo sembré la hierba buena. Sin atenuar el fervor que eran semillas en mí. Una vez la conocí, cual fascinante emoción, querido por su atracción de su hipocresía bella. Como un loco fui tras ella y le di mi corazón.
Shortly after we finished the commercial, Madeline had a falling out with Drucker and left Puerto Rico. Don Lopez went too. Cynthia decided that she couldn't teach dance on tiled floors, so that project also fell by the wayside. To top it off, the woman whose apartment we'd been subletting was returning, so we now needed not only a dance studio with wooden floors, we needed someplace to live. Fate presented the solution. Stefan Bukajemski, an architect who lived on the third floor next to the Butterfly People, invited us to dinner one Sunday evening. On the way up, Cynthia noticed a vacant loft on the second floor. It was pretty dark inside, but appeared to be some sort of theater. Stefan told us that it had been a theater, the Café Teatro del Terror, a sort of Puerto Rican Gran Guignol. It was the same layout as his, a 5,000 square foot loft surrounding a courtyard. The only difference was that it had a walkway crossing over the patio and had wooden floors instead of tile. He said it had been vacant for quite a while and that the landlady was desperate to rent, so we could probably get it for a good price. Cynthia called the landlady, Maria Sanchez, the next morning. She gave us a tour of the premises and told us its history. The building was originally the Casino Español, a social club for Puerto Rican elite, and the second floor had been the ballroom. The place was in dismal condition. The stained glass window on the stairwell was broken. All walls were cracked and plaster was peeling. Floors were covered with some sort of adhesive that looked like tar. Still, it suited our needs. There were 2 long rooms of approximately the same size. One could serve as the dance studio, the other as our apartment. There was also an enormous air-conditioned front room, which most recently had been the theater. It had 3 balconies overlooking Calle Fortaleza, a stage complete with drapes, a sound system, lights, and a lighting board, a fully stocked bar, 2x4 padded benches covered in unborn naga hide, plus a few homemade cocktail tables and a pair of beat-up bar stools. We reached a suitable agreement with Maria and signed a 10-year lease at $450 a month. Cynthia hired a crew to begin restoration and gave them $1,000 for supplies and labor. They turned out to be a gang of lazy local drunks who bought 10 gallons of whitewash and went to work. We told them that shouty approach was unacceptable, that we wanted the walls plastered and then painted. They left and never showed up again. We kept their tools, which were almost as worthless as they were, but might come in handy. I taught Cynthia how to plaster and paint, which she did while I was at work. After I finished serving lunch, I'd come over and sand floors. Since we had the only wooden floors on the island, other than a couple of bowling alleys, there was no floor sanding service. Neither were there any floor sanders. So I rented an industrial buffer and bought several dozen carbide discs and pounds of steel wool to make them adhere to the buffer brush. This is not a good way to sand floors, especially since the last time they were sanded, 2 kids using small orbital sanders performed the task. I had to knock the wood down almost 1/4 of an inch to get rid of the grooves. Even then I couldn't remove them all, or there would have been nothing left but veneer. I started in the theater because the floors there were in the best shape. I'd sand, then Cynthia would sweep up and teach class while I cooked dinner. This went on daily for 3 months. It was 6 months before I could stand up straight. We had no interest in the theater, but Drakir thought it would be great for him. He'd knock out the wall that separated it from his main gallery and have a gigantic butterfly mausoleum. He thought that 9 cents a square foot was far too much. Surprising, considering he was charging me $1,200 a month for 1/8 that amount of space. It was but one of our many disagreements, so shortly before I was to begin serving dinner, we parted company.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 1, 2, 3, 4.
With a lot more time on my hands, I busied myself building ballet bars and hanging mirrors. Cynthia's dance classes were growing, but not enough to pay all the bills now that I was unemployed. we needed more income. Since we already had most of the necessary equipment and a room going to waste, we decided to open a nightclub. As is often the case, that decision proved easier than the actual doing. We'd no sooner informed Maria Sanchez of our intention than she came in and removed all the booze. Then I discovered that most of the dimmers on the light board were burned out, as were many of the lights. What I thought was a sound console turned out to be a 25-watt PA system with two 12-inch speakers. Undaunted, I set about stringing wires and making new lights from coffee cans, floodlights, and spotlights. We bought a canopy, then I created a logo and made a sign. Flyers and invitations followed. Our original intention was to call the club the Palace, with the A burned out like the Hotel Baltimore. But the Palace Hotel opened shortly before we did, so by default we became The Place. Selecting the opening acts was simple. Madeline was a given, so was Dale Wales. I first met Dale in Puerto Rico in 1961. He was leading a band at La Botella that featured Juancito Torres and Charlie Rodriguez. He was also wooing his future wife, Liz Sheridan, who worked the piano bar there. La Botella was the jazz scene in the early 60s. People were still talking about it. We renewed our friendship years later in New York. Fate now led us back to Puerto Rico at the same time. Dale was working with Paul Neves at Minnie's, the current jazz scene, but he wanted a band of his own. Paul was set to play Wednesday nights, solo. Not because we didn't want to pay a group, but because I wanted to hear him play without anyone else getting in the way. Of course, we didn't have a piano, or the funds to buy one. Fate stepped in again. A friend of Cynthia's needed a place to store her piano while her house was being renovated. Bassist Faruco Gandia loaned us his sound system, and Marty Searcy lent us a microphone. By opening night, we were so broke we had to borrow $100 from Graham Seidman just to make change. On November 24th, 1988, a year after leaving the Butterfly People, we opened our doors to the public. It was the biggest opening San Juan had seen in years. We thought our success was assured. There was a problem, though. We made the mistake of running tabs on everybody, which included the $4 cover charge. The waitresses couldn't make change fast enough, so most people left without paying. Our opening night was almost our closing. After we paid the band, the staff, and Graham, we were almost as broke as before. I overheard someone asking Gato about the place. He said, well, they're nice people, but they don't know what they're doing. He was right, so we started making changes. We fired all the staff but one bartender. Cynthia began serving drinks, and we ran no tabs. I bought a bass from Joe Zambrana and set about practicing. I hadn't played for 15 years and lost a lot of blood building at my calluses. Since customers were so few, we moved the piano down to the floor and closed the curtains on stage to make the ambience more intimate. The clothing store downstairs was throwing away a couple of mannequins. I brought them upstairs and we dressed them in costumes left by the previous tenant, then put them out on the balconies in an effort to lure customers. When that didn't work, we sat them on the benches inside. A drunk came in one night and bought one of them 3 rounds. He left in a huff when she refused to talk to him. We'd opened during the Christmas season, thinking everybody would be in a partying mood. What we didn't know is during that season, Puerto Ricans party at home or in the streets. Christmas came, and with no money for a tree, we decorated one of the mannequins with ornaments given us by Nat Barrett from Barrachina Jewelers. Darío Estrella said our problem stemmed from the bad vibes left by the Teatro del Terror. We removed all their posters and put up our own. Every night he came in early and burned sulfur. It smelled like hell, but it must have worked. Audiences grew. Darío's ambition was to play faster than the speed of light. It might have been better if he played faster than the speed of sound. In his manic moments, which was most of the time, he could clear the house in 16 bars.
Tu as ma vie entre tes mains et mon cœur dans ton tambour. Ma vie n'est plus sans lendemain.
One night Yildi's cassette player failed. I asked Lou to play for her. But I'm blind. I told him not to worry, just play 3 movements, fast, slow, and faster. For the first movement, play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Use the melodic minor. Second movement, slow and sexy in 4/4. Ionian is okay. Third movement, play 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in harmonic minor. She'll follow. It was the best performance she ever gave.
Tu as la clé de mon destin.
Lou played the place off and on for several months, sometimes in groups, often solo. He split his time between St. Thomas and San Juan and usually stayed with us when he was in town. His tribute to Billy Strayhorn, written to Wayne Shorter's Sweet Pea, was amazing. He sang it as if it were Shorter playing. There once was a man played piano, a strange, quiet guy from Chicago, they say. He could play. We crossed Chelsea Bridge, took the A train, then down to Duke's place where the cottontails run. It was fun. I'd first heard Nancy Janison in New York. She played in Don Pinto's 30-piece jazz rock band Brownie's Revenge. She'd studied flute with Jean-Pierre Rampal and also played tenor sax. One night a guy at the bar said he'd give her $20 to just play the flute. It wasn't because he didn't like her tenor playing. The sax covered her cleavage. Freddie Silva, principal bassist with the Puerto Rico Symphony, approached me with the idea of doing a series of Sunday afternoon concerts, classical and jazz. They were to be free and the musicians would perform gratis. It was an amazingly generous offer, one I couldn't refuse. He'd lined up pianist Vanessa Rasayo, clarinetist Kathy Jones, oboist David Burns, and Harry Rosario and Gloria Navarro on English horn. all members of the symphony and teachers at the conservatory. He and Paul Neves would provide the jazz. We also included Dario Estrella and Cynthia's professional students. Vanessa Vasallo performed Ginastera's 3 dances. The third dance was a bravura performance. The closing chord was an explosion, bringing a spontaneous standing ovation from the audience. I saw later what had caused the blast. She'd broken the lowest C string. A young artist from LA said, "You know what this place needs? A mural." I told him we had no money. He said not to worry, he'd do it for nothing. All we had to do was provide the paint. Peter Burns knew nothing about jazz, so I told him to come in every night and listen. After closing, he'd sleep on the stage to soak in the ambience and gather ideas. This went on for days. Every morning we'd bring him breakfast and check out his progress. He used a photo from the big broadcast of 1938 as a model. Center was a man holding a violin. I told him there were some jazz violinists, but it wasn't common. He changed it to a clarinet. He had also noticed that there were no Latinos in the picture, so he changed the face. Then he threw in a Billie Holiday look-alike, a trumpet player somewhere between Satchmo, Diz, and Miles, and a piano player similar to George Shearing. It was finished at the perfect time. Bob McCoy from the San Juan Star had told me that he couldn't keep publicizing groups at the place. It made the Star look like a sponsor. Now we had something new to offer.
The place meant to me sort of like something like a workshop, like a jazz workshop, a school kind of thing where you learn things that are not written in books, and it had a magic of its own that cannot be duplicated. It's one of those places that when I think back at it, it was like an international jazz workshop in the middle of the Caribbean. And I wish that many of the young players that are coming up now, the jazz players that are coming up in Puerto Rico, would be able to experience being part of the history of the place.
I started performing at the place about 25 years ago. I was introduced to Bob and Cynthia by my friend and musical mentor Eddie O'Neill, who was a native of Manatee. When I first met Bob and Cynthia, I started playing trios of various combinations, sometimes with Bob playing bass and with Eddie on drums and some other combinations of people that I don't quite remember. What I do remember is the feeling of acceptance and support that I got at the place. Since I lived out in Manatee and didn't have a car, I used to come in and sleep over and sleep on the pews in the club. So that was quite an experience, and I always thank Bob and Cynthia for my first inroads into playing jazz in Puerto Rico. And the ironic thing was that I played more jazz there, and in large part because of Bob and Cynthia in the place, more than I had ever played in Boston or New York. I ended up moving back to Puerto Rico a couple other times, but the main time that I went there, something strange happened. I went down to PR to get my things to return back up to Atlantic City, but as soon as I stepped off the plane, I smelled the salitre and said, you know what, I'm not going back to New Jersey, I'm coming back to Puerto Rico. And my friend Eddie was still there, and another buddy from music school, Hugh Burrows, was there, and we formed a band called Cuco, along with Tito Colon, who played congas, and again, Bob and Cynthia made a great home for us at the place. This time around, there was a lot of experimentation going on musical and otherwise. And Bob was very encouraging, and we used to startle ourselves, probably not startle Bob. He wasn't startled very easily, but I think we startled some of the people in there. We would sort of go on hour-long musical journeys and see where we ended up. And there are not too many club owners who really appreciate you doing that, and that's one of my biggest memories of being at the place, is just how much of a home they were for this particular group.
Something cool. I'd like to order something cool. It's so warm here, and the heat gets me down. Yes, I like something cool. It's all right.
We wangled our way through the first year, threadbarely. By the end of the year, we had to hawk what little jewelry we owned just to pay the band. Selling jazz to Puerto Ricans was like selling popsicles to penguins. Sometimes we couldn't even give it away. Clearly, things had to change. A new jazz club had opened in the Condado, Cats, named for its owner, Carlos A. Troche. I worked there for several weeks with Dale Wales. Carlos asked me if I'd like to buy his club. I told him the only reason I was playing his place was to keep mine open. Cats had only one life, a short one. In the meantime, a new club had opened on the Boulevard del Valle in Old San Juan, Tony's place for jazz. I talked with Tony to see how he was making out, and then told him our problems. He said, "Why don't you do what I do? They take the door, I take the bar. If they make money, I make money. If nobody comes, neither of us gets hurt too bad." We made the shift. There weren't enough jazz musicians to go around, so in our second year we added local folkloric and Nueva Trova groups to the lineup. These groups were easier to find. Latea, El Monólogo, and Ocho Puertas had closed, so there were few places left for them to play. Discos were now the order of the day. We still had our weekly jam sessions, though.
I worked on cruise ships for about 5 years, and for about 3.5 of those 5 years I had the opportunity of going to San Juan every week, and very quickly found out about the place. Got to meet Bob and his wife Cynthia, and it very quickly became the highlight of my week, something I looked forward to. Not that the rest of the cruise life was so terrible, but this was just so great to have a place to go and jam every night and not have to play music that you normally play for all the passengers and talent show and everything else that goes along with it. This was our time for creativity. Played a lot of jazz, a lot of bebop, some post-bop. We even put a group together from our ship that we called the Ganja Powered Combo. And I had a lot of arrangements that I had transcribed over the years. 3-horn arrangements, a lot of Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, and things we transcribed from Miles Davis concert, from Jaco Pastorius. So we had a lot of charts and no place to play them until we got the place, and we put a little concert together, and it was a ball. One day we got off the ship and we went over to Bob at the place, and he said to us, "I've got bad news and I've got good news." So we said, "Well, what's the bad news?" And the bad news is there's going to be no jam session tonight. Well, of course we were pretty disappointed by that until he told us the good news. He said, "The good news is Bata Kumbele is rehearsing at the place." And so that night we got to hear Bata Kumbele, which is a phenomenal salsa band from Puerto Rico. Got to watch them rehearse and put together a concert, which I still have on tape. Every time we went to the place, it was a lot of the musicians from the ship, and I rarely remember a Wednesday night that I didn't go to the place unless I was deathly ill. Other musicians came from other ships, so we get to meet some people we knew, and we got to know other people. One of the things I enjoyed about going to the place, aside from the music and all the musicians I got to hang out with, were Bob and Cynthia, and just being able to spend a little bit of time with them. Bob was a great chef, and sometimes he'd invite us over for dinner and cook us a great gourmet meal, and then we'd get to spend some quality time together. Not only that, there were some great musicians right in San Juan. At the time, at the University of Puerto Rico, was a very young saxophone player by the name of David Sanchez, and his buddy John Benitez, who played bass. And these kids were 17 years old, but they just sounded amazing. And of course, there's living proof of that now.
My daughters Morgan and Destiny came to visit for the Pan Am Games this summer of '79. We visited Graham Seidman at his home in Rancho Guayama, where I cooked my first whole lechon. Noticing all the costumes and sets lying around unused, the girls decided to put on a play. They wrote the clue in the notepad and starred in it. I directed, built the sets, and designed the sound effects and lighting. Cynthia choreographed several pieces for her young dance students, and we added Dolly's Follies to the program. Bob McCoy, the entertainment editor for the San Juan Star, said it was the best production he'd seen in Puerto Rico. Local businessmen Bob Fife and Joe Harper, whose daughters Jenny and Robin appeared in the production, must have thought so too. They contacted Norman Keane in New York to obtain the rights for a production of O Calcutta at the place. Keane showed up with his entourage and set to work. Contract negotiations fell through when I discovered that the producers would take all the receipts from the door, and due to a clause in Keane's contract with the writers, I would have to add about $20,000 worth of lighting and pay the electric bill. It was just as well. I was designated the patsy, the guy who goes to the slammer in case there's difficulty with local censors. Given the tenor of the time, I figured I'd be doing a lot of time in Oso Blanco, the local lockup. Bob McCoy suggested that we instead present Bruce J. Friedman's Steam Bath. I ordered several copies of the script, we cast it, and began rehearsals. Bob played the old-timer, Peter Summick was cast as Tandy, Jerry Finkelstein played the stockbroker, Helene Buckley the girl, a couple of Cynthia's dance students were the delicate young men, and comedian Phil Munette was Morty, the steam bath attendant, also known as God. I'd constructed the set, but there were still things needed, such as a shower and a steam machine. We held a backers audition, but while waiting for potential angels to fly in, we received word that Puerto Rico's most beloved governor, Luis Muñoz Marin, had just died. So did all our hopes. Our next theatrical gamble came in the summer of 1982. A group of oddball scientist actors pulled into San Juan Harbor seeking dry dock to make repairs on their 82-foot ferro cement Chinese junk, the Heraclitus. They were sorely needed. In Venezuela, they'd been moored between two giant tankers. A storm arose and the tankers knocked several holes in the hull. The crew was up all night baking bread to patch the cracks and keep her afloat. They'd just come from a one-year voyage down the Amazon where they were seeking heretofore unknown herbs. Judging from the music, dance, and skits presented, they must have found some, and were still using them. Corral de la Cruz thought Tristan Tzara's Corazon a Gas was best presented in the cabaret setting, since it was in cabarets that the Dadaist movement began.
They were right. The place was as data as it gets, and the play easiest to get a handle on if you were half-gassed. Uruguayan journalist, author, poet, playwright Mario Benedetti's two-man play Pedro y el Capitán explores the subtle interrelationships between the torturer and the tortured. After a while, it's difficult to distinguish between the two. The play was sponsored by Amnesty International, which knows much about such things. This was our last theatrical venture. Early in 1983, the ad agency for Schaefer Beer approached me with a proposal. Schaefer was introducing a new beer, Schaefer Light. Their idea was to host a summer series of rock concerts at the place. They would hire the groups and pay them. They would take care of all advertising and publicity, and the concerts would be broadcast the following Sunday on 95X. We would receive the $3 cover charge, which would include one Schaefer Light. They would provide the beer. There was a catch, of course. The church pews had to go. We'd been wanting to replace them anyway, but hadn't the money. This seemed a perfect opportunity. Some new garden chairs had just appeared on the market but hadn't yet reached Puerto Rico, so Cynthia called her mother in Ohio and asked if she could help. Erna bought 100 plastic-covered wire chairs and took them to the airport. The chairs were cheap. The shipping wasn't. While awaiting their arrival, we began tarting up the place. We bought several bolts of blue cloth and with the help of friend Kevin Shetterly began draping the ceiling and downstairs hallway. I also covered the ceiling and back wall on the stage in white gauze after stringing the back wall with blue and white Christmas lights. I added some blue, yellow, and red footlights at the bottom. Tony Tercy had just closed the Riviera down by the docks. We bought some cocktail tables, bar stools, and stage lights from them, plus a huge mirror ball. Knowing that the music was bound to be loud, I carpeted the stage and built a riser for the drums, hoping to muffle the reverberation. By now we'd also managed to buy a 1928 Baldwin grand piano and a sound system, a 4-channel PV amp with 2 large speakers. It was more than we needed. The place had the best acoustics of any room outside of Carnegie Hall. Every group brought their own sound, stacks of floor-to-ceiling speakers, 24-track mixing board, and 10 million megawatt amps. As one might expect, everything was maxed out. I asked one of the Rockets why they had to play so loud. He said, "We're not good enough to play soft." We made a profit, though not as much as we'd expected. Of course, if we'd sold coke and smoke, we could have retired. But the money went out just as fast as it came in. Every day we had to repair and repaint. Rockers are a rowdy lot. They ripped bathroom sinks off the walls, smashed toilets and urinals, and every wall from the halls to the bathroom had filthy footprints at knee-high level. I called it the flamingo syndrome.